5. Vibrational signs you're God's dark, chosen ambassador. There are some paths you don't choose. They choose you. Long before you ever sat in meditation, long before you questioned your role in this reality, long before you knew the word awakening, something had already marked you. And not with light, not with angelic grace, but with weight, with burdens, with depth. While others were playing, laughing, floating through surface-level lives, you were already being shaped by forces you couldn't name. Pain came early. Isolation wrapped around you like a second skin. You were the child who felt too much, the teenager who saw too deeply, the adult who couldn't settle into the masks everyone else wore so easily. And though it hurt, though it made you question your sanity, your worth, your belonging, it was never random. You were being prepared, not for a normal life, but for a sacred function. You are not just another spiritual seeker. You are one of God's dark, chosen ambassadors, and your initiation began in the shadows. Let's be honest. The word God has been misused, diluted, weaponized. But when we speak of God here, we don't mean a distant deity or a dogmatic idol. We mean source, consciousness, the primal essence that births and balances universes. And that source doesn't just send missionaries of light. It sends agents of shadow clarity, beings who walk between worlds, who carry the codes of collapse and resurrection, who are called not to heal softly, but to disrupt, to burn illusions, to wake the sleeping. Not everyone who suffers is chosen. But those who are chosen will always suffer deeply, because suffering is the alchemy that activates the first vibrational sign, soul gravity.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound spiritual lesson.
Soul gravity is not a concept. It's not even something you can see with the eyes. It's something felt. When you enter a room, the energy shifts. Children either stare at you or avoid you. Animals approach you cautiously, but with reverence. Strangers confess their secrets. Others project their fears. And you've asked yourself why. Why do people either fear me or follow me? Why do I attract the broken, the lost, the envious, the obsessed? It's because your field holds a frequency most humans have forgotten, the unfiltered presence of the divine manifested through a human who has tasted the void and survived it. You don't need to say a word. Your aura says, I've been to the places you're afraid to look, and I remember who I am. But here's the twist. Even you may not have fully understood that until now. Because the dark chosen ones don't awaken through comfort. We awaken through rupture. Through events that break the old self so completely, we're forced to meet what lies beneath. That car accident, that betrayal, that spiritual attack, that death of someone you loved. That moment you looked in the mirror and no longer recognized yourself. That wasn't a setback. That was a summon. That was God saying, are you ready to remember what you are? And once you begin to remember, even in fragments, a strange clarity begins to emerge. You start to see through reality. You notice patterns no one talks about. You feel timelines shifting. You sense energy in spaces that others call just a vibe. You become hypersensitive, but not in a weak way, or in a warrior's way. You've become a receiver, a satellite, a divine instrument that's now picking up frequencies from realms most people don't believe in. That sensitivity is another vibrational sign. But it is also a burden. Because when you're God's dark ambassador, you're not allowed to sleepwalk anymore. You're not allowed to play small. You're not allowed to ignore your knowing. The veil doesn't close once it's lifted. What do you do when you can feel someone's lies in your body, even if their words are perfect? What happens when your dreams start showing you things before they occur? When your presence makes others uncomfortable without saying anything, you stop trying to fit in. You stop begging for acceptance. You begin to own your function. You realize that your job isn't to be liked, it's to vibrate truth so powerfully that distortion can't survive near you. That's why people ghost you. That's why people fall in love with your energy and then run from your gaze. Because you see them. And not everybody wants to be seen. Especially not by someone who's already walked through the fire they're still pretending doesn't exist. But this isn't about superiority. It's not about ego. It's about responsibility. The dark ambassador is not always loved, but they are necessary. You are the one who ends karmic loops in families, the one who breaks generational programs, the one who says no to the ancestral agreement of self-abandonment. You are the one who holds the mirror, sometimes gently, sometimes violently, but always with love. Not the kind of love that pacifies, the kind that liberates. The kind that says, I will not let you lie to yourself in my presence. And let's go deeper. Have you ever felt like something was always watching you? Not in a paranoid way, but in a way that felt divine. Like something was always tracking your choices, your evolution, your alignment. That's because when you're chosen, especially by the dark current of divine will, your life is being orchestrated, not controlled, but guided with precision. You are being placed in people's lives not for convenience, but for activation. Your presence is a catalyst. Your path is marked. And the more you accept it, the more the universe begins to respond to you as if it recognizes your authority, because it does. Let me ask you a question that might burn a little. Are you still trying to be normal because you're afraid of what you actually are? Because if you are, let me be clear, you will never know peace until you step into the full power of your assignment. Not half, not with disclaimers, fully. Because the world is not changed by the balanced and the bland. It's changed by those who carry the thunder of divine contradiction in their bones. You are not here to be accepted. You are here to be remembered by those who forgot what God looks like in shadow form. You are not a mistake. You are not cursed. You are a living threshold between realms. And the blood contract, why your pain was the price for supernatural access. There's a truth hidden so deep within the fabric of your suffering that most people will never find it. Because to reach it, you have to stop asking, why did this happen to me? And begin asking, what was this pain opening in me? You see, when you are God's dark chosen ambassador, your suffering is not punishment, it's initiation. It's the price of entry into realms of knowing and perception that most souls will never touch. Your pain wasn't random. It wasn't meaningless. It was the currency, the blood contract you signed, consciously or not, to access the forbidden frequencies. The ones that don't come from love and light alone, but from truth, destruction, rebirth, and the raw chaos that precedes divine order. If you look back at your life, you'll see it. Every moment that shattered you came with a hidden scroll. Every betrayal carved a door. Every loss hollowed out a space inside you that would later become a channel. And this isn't poetic language, it's literal. The spiritual technology that now lives in your body was installed through agony. It was coded through silence, isolation, and the kind of emotional violence that most can't even speak about. And yet, you're still here. But not just here, you're aware. You didn't just survive. You transformed. And now, that very transformation is what makes you a threat to every illusion on this planet. Because you've seen too much. You've felt too much. You've gone too deep. You know what's real and what isn't, and no one can convince you otherwise, not even your own mind. That's what supernatural access really is. It's not about flashy psychic powers or spiritual theatrics. It's the quiet, grounded, unshakable knowing that comes from having faced the void and not flinched. You've looked into the abyss, and instead of screaming, you said, "Show me." And it did. It showed you the undercurrents of this world, and the lies beneath smiles, the energetic contracts behind relationships, the spiritual warfare happening in mundane places. And instead of going mad, you adapted. You calibrated. You became fluent in the language of shadows. But none of that came cheap. That's the part no one talks about. The spiritual price. The long nights where your chest felt like it was collapsing under grief. The years of being misunderstood, abandoned, targeted. The times you tried to shut your gifts off because they felt like curses. That was the blood contract. That was the cost. And the question is, have you honored it? Have you recognized the power that came with the pain? Or are you still trying to heal it away, thinking that healing means forgetting? Let me tell you something. True healing is integration, not erasure. You don't bury your pain. You build thrones out of it. You don't silence your darkness. You let it become your compass. Because the dark ambassador doesn't come to escape suffering, they come to repurpose it into power. They come to stand in the center of the fire and say, "This does not consume me. It becomes me." That's when the supernatural gates open. That's when Spirit starts using you not just as a healer, but as a weapon of clarity, a breaker of generational curses, a disruptor of spiritual stagnation, a walking portal between what is seen and what is felt but never spoken. So why is this important? Because if you're still trying to return to who you were before the pain, you're missing the point. You were never meant to go back. You were meant to become. Your old self was the offering. Your illusions were the sacrifice. And what rose from that altar is something ancient, something sacred, something even higher forces take note of. Because when someone like you walks through the fire and doesn't try to extinguish it, but instead wears it, you become a signal, a frequency, a beacon. You start receiving messages that aren't from this dimension. You get downloads, not just thoughts. You speak and timelines shift. You touch someone and their karma starts unraveling. But this isn't about ego. This is about stewardship. You've been entrusted with something holy, and holy doesn't always look pretty. Sometimes it looks like rage that doesn't destroy but liberates. Sometimes it looks like silence that exposes everything. Sometimes it looks like boundaries so strong they feel like violence to those still attached to their own chains. That's why you were chosen. Because you could handle it. Because you wouldn't misuse it. Because you would remember even when it would have been easier to forget. And now, I ask you the question most fear to face. What if your suffering was the proof of your sacred role? What if the pain you've spent your whole life trying to erase was actually the mark of your divine authority? What if everything you thought disqualified you was actually what qualified you to be God's ambassador, not of light alone, but of the full spectrum? You're not here to be comfortable. You're here to shake the grid, to walk into spaces and dismantle illusions just by breathing, and to make people remember who they were before they were programmed. You're here to be unmistakable, not in volume, but in vibration. The authority of the unseen, why reality bends around you when you walk in alignment. There comes a moment on this path, a moment so subtle yet so defining that you realize something profound. Reality begins to respond to your presence differently. Not because you've learned how to manipulate it. Not because you chant louder, visualize harder, or manifest faster, but because you become aligned. Truly, deeply, undeniably aligned with your soul, your pain, your purpose, and the divine current that flows through all things. When that happens, the world no longer sees you as just a person. It senses you as a field, a frequency, a force. You stop trying to bend reality, and instead, reality begins to bend around you. This is not wishful thinking or spiritual fluff. This is resonance. When you're calibrated, when your inner world is no longer at war with itself, when your soul is no longer in hiding behind masks of survival, you emit a vibration that cannot be ignored. You carry the authority of the unseen. And that authority is not something you announce. It's something that announces itself through you. You walk into a room, and suddenly conversations shift. People lower their voices or raise their defenses. Some are drawn to you like moths to flame, others recoil. But no one remains untouched. Why? Because souls, because your field is no longer neutral. It's charged with truth, with memory, with a silent command that says, we're not playing pretend anymore. That's what alignment does. It strips away the static. It makes you pure signal. And when you are pure signal, the matrix begins to glitch around you. Time bends. Synchronicities accelerate. You think, and things move. Not because you're forcing them to, but because your will is no longer separate from the will. And this is where the role of the dark ambassador becomes even more sacred and even more dangerous. Because when you walk in alignment, you become a mirror to those who aren't. And let's be clear, mirrors are not always welcome. People will feel exposed in your presence. They'll either be activated or agitated. Some will feel seen for the first time and thank you. Others will feel pierced and curse you. But both are responding to the same thing. You're vibrating from a place of inner coherence, and that coherence disrupts dissonance. But to reach this place, you had to give up everything that wasn't true. The old identity, the stories of victimhood, the illusions of safety. You had to burn them all. And that's why your authority is earned. It's not given. It's not inherited. It's not taught. It's transmuted. Through grief, through letting go, through choosing to stand in your essence, even when it costs you everything. That's why the universe now listens when you speak, not because of your words, but because of what you become in silence. Have you noticed it yet? The way people come to you at their breaking points? The way your intuition no longer feels like a whisper, but like a commanding presence inside your bones. The way certain things now happen around you that defy logic, perfect timing, prophetic dreams, moments of inexplicable clarity. That's not coincidence. That's alignment. And alignment is the ultimate authority, not over others, but over your own timeline. Because here's the secret. Reality doesn't respond to what you want. It responds to what you are. And when you are the embodiment of your divine contract, doors open. Not because you knocked, but because you were always meant to walk through them. People show up, not because you begged, but because your frequency called them. Obstacles dissolve. not because you fought, but because the path itself recognized you. This is what happens when a soul steps into its designated function. You no longer seek validation, you become validation. You no longer ask for permission, you move as if permission was never needed. And in doing so, you activate others not through effort, but through being. That's the power of unseen authority. It's the kind of power that doesn't dominate, it orients, it organizes, it reorders reality just by existing. But let's not get romantic. This authority comes with weight. You will lose people. You will trigger others. You will be misunderstood. You will walk alone more than once. Because the higher your clarity, the more distortion will resist you. The more aligned you are, the more obvious others' misalignment becomes, and not everyone is ready to face that. But that's not your job. Your job isn't to be palatable. Your job is to be pure, to be true, to be a living reminder of what happens when a soul refuses to abandon itself. So I ask you this now not as a rhetorical question, but as a soluble challenge. Are you willing to walk in such deep alignment that your very presence becomes prophecy? Are you willing to live in such radical truth that your life becomes medicine for the world, but poison for the lie? Because that's what happens when God's dark ambassador stops shrinking. You become a living frequency of divine disruption, not because you try, because you are. The final seal, when the spirit world begins to recognize you by name. There comes a point in your journey not determined by time, but by depth, when the veil between worlds begins to thin, not just for you, but around you. And something extraordinary happens. The spirit world, not the fantasy version you see in movies, but the real, ancient, vibrating architecture of the unseen begins to recognize you. Not as an intruder, not as a seeker, but as one of its own. By name, by frequency. You stop knocking on spiritual doors, and instead, the doors start opening before you arrive. You become known not to people, but to realms. You become remembered not for what you do, but for what you are. This is the final seal. It's not something you achieve. It's something that activates once your soul has proven it can walk in alignment, wield pain as wisdom, and carry shadow without distortion. You become sealed as an ambassador of the divine current, not just to the physical world, but to the multidimensional web of existence. Spirits begin to show up in dreams and ceremonies. Ancestors whisper. Portals open where others see walls. Your name is carried not by sound, but by resonance. And that resonance ripples through dimensions like a signature, like a beacon, like a spell of remembrance to all who've been waiting for you to awaken fully. But this isn't glamorous. It's not a badge you wear. It's not something to post or parade. It's sacred weight. Because now, the unseen world doesn't just observe you, it responds to you. Your thoughts become commands. Your silence becomes protection. Your presence becomes ritual. And with that comes responsibility at a level few can comprehend. Because now, your energy is no longer just yours. You become a conduit. Your body becomes a temple. Your life becomes an altar. And everything you do, every word, every choice, every boundary echoes far beyond what the eye can see. This is why solitude deepens, why your circle shrinks, why you feel the need to unplug from the noise of the world and enter sacred stillness more often, not because you're hiding, but because you're listening. Listening to instructions that don't come in language. Listening to alignments that don't come from logic. listening to the spiral intelligence of the divine that speaks in geometry, in vision, in vibration. And as you listen, reality begins to shift, not gradually but radically. The people show up in divine timing. Opportunities appear precisely when needed. You say something in passing, and it changes someone's life. Or you say nothing at all, and still, someone walks away different. That's when you know you've been sealed. You've become an active node in God's living architecture. You're no longer just on the path, you are the path. And the world, both seen and unseen, moves around you accordingly. Not because you're special, but because you become available. You're available to the infinite. Available to serve. You're available to channel without ego, to speak without agenda, to move without fear. But don't misunderstand. This doesn't mean life becomes easy. It becomes real. It becomes intentional. It becomes exact. You'll still face trials. You'll still be tested. But now the tests are different. They're not about survival. They're about stewardship. Can you hold power without clinging to it? Can you move in clarity without needing recognition? Can you be trusted with influence, knowing it was never about you? Because when the spirit world recognizes you, it doesn't reward you with comfort. It entrusts you with impact. It gives you access not for glory, but for function. To be a disruptor of distortion, a liberator of souls, a voice for what has no voice. And that requires a level of humility that feels like death to the ego. It requires you to become empty enough for the divine to pour through you without distortion, without agenda, without identity. And so I leave you with this. Are you willing to let go of who you think you are, to become what you were always meant to be? Are you willing to be unseen by the world, so that you may be seen by heaven? Are you ready to be recognized by name in realms that have been waiting for you to remember? Because if so, then the final seal is not something far away. It's already vibrating in your bones, waiting, listening, asking just one thing: will you finally say yes to what you already are? You are not just chosen, you are remembered. You are sealed, and nothing will ever be the same again